Where's Dave? No, we have enough numbers.
All right, welcome everybody, all three of you out there, to this planning board meeting, Wednesday, April 18th, 2018. First item on our agenda is a roll call. Tonight we have Lisa Buck, we have Krista Swinzer, we have Judd McIntosh, myself, Phil Ruck, we've got Jeremy Chubbuck, Dave Thompson, we've got John Beckett, and we've got Mike Costello on the end. So next item is acceptance of the agenda.
So moved.
Very good, thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
Good, any discussion, additions? Very good, all those in favor of the agenda as presented is unanimous. Next up, approval of the minutes of our meeting on March 21st, 2018.
So moved.
Very good, thank you. Can I have a second? Very good, any edits? Comments? Good work. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks.
Hearing none, I guess all those in favor of the minutes as presented. Very good. Next up, we have one public hearing this evening. It is an amendment to the following sections of the land use ordinance 18-31, 18-106, 18-140, and 18-177. To number one, define drive-through facility, drive-through restaurant, and menu board. And number two, to make drive-through restaurant an allowed use in the village commercial district with planning board site plan review and approval. And number three, require additional site plan review criteria for a drive-through facility in the village commercial district. So I understand, Evan, were you just going to give us a brief summary, and then Dave was going to jump in even farther?
Yeah, I didn't say it would be brief. Yes, I will give a summary. Let me just want to see one thing. Okay, yeah, I've caught up on this. Jana had worked with Dave on this, but I've caught up on it and provided the memorandum to you and reviewed the draft amendments. So I'll give you a sort of a technical summary and leave it to Dave to discuss the reasoning, the rationale, why this comes before you now. Right now, in our ordinance, drive-through facilities of all kinds are allowed, including drive-through restaurants. The term drive-through facility is not defined. We have a definition of drive-in restaurant, which presumably includes drive-through, but it also includes walk-up stands and, you know, the kind of old 1950s stand where you could drive in and be served by people on roller skates. Right now, drive-through facilities of all kinds are allowed throughout town, with the exception of drive-through restaurants, which are not allowed in the village commercial district. Drive-through restaurants are allowed in the commercial 1 district. When I say throughout town, too, I'm talking about through the commercial areas of town. So drive-through facilities, including drive-through restaurants, are allowed in the commercial 1 district, commercial 2 district, and drive-through facilities excluding restaurants are allowed in the village commercial district. So we have at least 3 in our village commercial district, all associated with banks. This amendment would, and there are some standards very specific to drive-through facilities in our current ordinance that would apply to any proposal that had a drive-through window. This proposal, the essence of the proposal is it would allow drive-through restaurants as well as other drive-through facilities in the village commercial district under certain circumstances, i.e. meeting certain heightened standards, both heightened performance standards and heightened standards of review when a project comes to site plan review. Specifically, it would, for the first time, give a definition to drive-through facility. Drive-through facilities are talked about in the performance standards, but they're not, that is not given as a definition, and it's not actually listed as a use. It's just, I guess, assumed that it would be an accessory to a restaurant, a bank, dry cleaners, or whatever might be using it. And it also creates a definition of drive-through restaurant, which is a subset of that, but very specific to eating places. It then establishes that drive-through restaurants would be allowed in the Village Commercial District, as well as currently in the Commercial 1 and the Commercial 2 District. It then sets some standards for that. It would only, for example, it would only be allowed in the Village Commercial District if it was on a lot of at least 30,000 square feet. Jana had done some research and found that the drive-through restaurants that we have in town now, and she did some secondary source research as well, found that that's typical because that's what's required to accommodate drive-through windows, the queuing of cars without blocking parking areas or going out into the public way. So it's a 30,000 square foot minimum lot size in the Village Commercial District. The minimum lot size in the C1 and C2 district already exceeds that, as a matter of course. It sets some heightened standards for drive-through facilities of any kind, banks, restaurants, dry cleaners, pharmacies, any kind of facility that might have a drive-through in the Village Commercial District. And those standards are, in addition to the minimum lot area, that there would be automatically a traffic analysis required. Right now, under our performance standards and site plan review ordinance, a traffic analysis is only triggered if there is a, if according to standard references, a certain level of peak hour traffic occurs or is expected to occur with that use. In this case, in the Village Commercial District, a traffic analysis would be required for any use that proposes any kind of drive-through facility, regardless of the level of traffic that is projected to be associated with that use. And that traffic analysis is keyed to what Maine Department of Transportation would require under its traffic movement permit for a relatively straightforward project, which is an analysis of the traffic impacts in the immediate vicinity of the land use that's got the drive-through facility, looking at the exits, looking at site distances, looking at how much traffic will be going out of the road, what the delays would be, are there any safety concerns and things like that. If the planning board felt it was necessary based on a particular situation, it could also require an enhanced analysis that would look at traffic impacts, what we would call downstream of the land use. That is, at segments of roadway and intersections that might be a block or two away, because you know that that's where the traffic is headed and could be overloading that downstream, those downstream facilities. It would also require a queuing analysis to assure that the stacking of cars at a drive-through window would not be blocking parking lots, the ability of people to get in and out, or coming out into a public way. And it would continue to look at things like pedestrian impacts, circulation, both in the site and adjacent to the site. The one thing that's not here that probably should be here, and I think probably was intended to be here but didn't, for whatever reason, didn't make it into this draft, is a standard that talks about the location of drive-through windows. Often they are not allowed within the facade of the building that faces a public way. So it would have to be on the side or rear away from a public way. There are other standards that already would apply under normal site plan reviews and performance standard reviews, things like landscaping buffers, signage limitations. In the village commercial and the commercial 2 zone, there are already some minimal design standards, architectural design standards. The roofs have to be pitched. The size of the footprint's limited. The type of siding is specified. It can't be big blank walls. There have to be some openings, doors, window kind of openings along the facade. So those standards already have been in our ordinance for a long time, and they've been applied, for example, up on Park Street for Bangor Savings Bank, Roma Joe's, and so forth. In plans, Penobscot Valley Dermatology is a good example of how that standard, those standards of design were applied. So it's a combination of existing standards plus heightened standards, basically to allow drive-through restaurants in the village commercial district as they're allowed elsewhere, but with standards of review and so forth that are heightened. This comes to you because it's a proposed ordinance amendment. I think it was the Conference Plan Committee, but it might have been the Community Development Committee of the Council referred it to the Planning Board for your review and recommendation, as it always does. As always, the first thing a Planning Board should be looking at is the consistency of the proposal with the comprehensive plan. And as those of you who are involved in the comprehensive plan know, this issue, this opportunity, but never arose in the 2 years that the plan was being prepared, so it wasn't specifically addressed, so there's nothing specific about drive-through restaurants in the village commercial district. There are 2 issues and / opportunities and policy statements that relate to the village commercial district in downtown, and a whole bunch of strategies that don't relate specifically to this, but those 2, one of them talks about the evolution of downtown away from what we think of as a neighborhood shopping district, you know, with grocery stores and hardware stores and so forth, into more of a entertainment, restaurant, food, drink, financial services kind of center, which is the evolution of many, many downtowns in Maine and elsewhere. And that there is, as a policy statement, supporting those things that would continue to strengthen downtown as a place that people want to be, because there are things here that they want to come to as a destination, as an activity center. And then there are a bunch of strategies related to that, but that's the general policy. The second has to do with the village commercial district and allowing the district to grow, but trying to assure that it stays true to its compact, walkable scale and its village architecture and character. So, you know, when you extended the village commercial district on Forest Ave last year, for example, that was one that you looked at, and then in fact was one of the strategies we talked about in the comprehensive plan. So those are the 2 overall policy statements. I mean, they're meant to be large in general, or broad in general, but you would weigh this proposal against those 2 things as part of your consideration. And then, of course, you would be looking at the standards themselves. Are they sufficient to meet the purpose? Is it desirable? Tonight, you can hear from what the public has to say. You can hear what the town, Dave representing the town as the applicant, has to say. You can decide, you can discuss it, debate it as you wish. You can decide to hold it over before you make a recommendation. You can decide to ask us for more information that would help you make that recommendation. You can decide to act tonight, either to recommend it with additional changes, or to recommend that it not be adopted by the council.
Thank you, Evan. So just an initial question in your summary, or Dave's summary, whoever put it together, mentioned that nobody really understood why 20 years ago that they never included this. Is there any institutional knowledge from counselors or whoever to understand why this might have been excluded in the village commercial and not C1, C2?
Yeah, I wasn't involved in this discussion with the council, so I came in this late, but I haven't heard anything, and I've not seen any written documentation. I went through the older comprehensive plan, and there was no specific discussion of it. As I said, it's not, downtowns treat these both ways. You know, we allow drive-throughs in our town. It's just not for restaurants in our downtown. Any other use could have a drive-through, it's just a restaurant can't, as of now. I suspect that might have to do perhaps with the idea that peak traffic flows are greater associated with a drive-through restaurant than with a drive-through bank, for example, and therefore might have some greater impact on traffic. It might have to do with the character of the downtown, or the worry that there might be too many franchise that would franchise kind of facilities that would come in that have their own architectural style, their own sort of mold, the way they build, and that might not fit in with what they want for signage and what they want for design, and it might not fit in with what downtown is like. But I'm not sure. We can continue our search. I haven't talked to any of the counselors who might have been here at that time. For all I know, in fact, I haven't looked at the ordinance pre-1999. It might have also not been allowed even back as early as the 70s and 80s. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. So unless there's any other questions, we could allow Dave to give us a summary on top of what Evan had to say. Do we want to do that before then we can hit him with questions. So, you're up.
Good evening, folks. I'm Dave Mylan. I'm the Director of Community Development, which means I oversee the offices of economic development as well as code enforcement and planning and assessing. This is sort of my wheelhouse that this ended up getting brought up. And before I start with my comments, I just add to Evan's. I'm enjoying my 40th year in public service this year, and I would say that it's pretty traditional for ordinances as back as the 80s that I've been involved with them. When they were originally inception of them, is that they prohibited drive-through businesses in downtown areas. Again, I can think of multiple communities that I'm associated with. Of course, Evans, more on top of that. That's pretty common. That I think back then that was a prohibited use. So then, things change over time, and sometimes in some areas that it can be okay, and some areas it can't be okay. So I would again, likewise, talking with the council, nobody was really aware or could verbalize why it was that way. It's just always been that way type thing. And why we're here tonight, why this even got brought up in the first place, is that, again, as the Economic Development Director, in the last 18, 20 months, we've had two businesses in the Village Commercial District, two properties in the Village Commercial District that have come up for sale that were both businesses that had existing drive-through windows, that the asset to the building itself, it was already there. So as the Economic Development Director, I was trying to figure out how do we, what strategies can we use to get the highest and best return and be able to repurpose those buildings. How can we do that in a in a timely fashion, at the same time keeping the flavor and the look and feel of Orono that's consistent with the comprehensive plan. So of those buildings, I would say that one, they both sold, and One of them was the People's Bank building, continued to be used as for that purpose. So that one didn't seem to impact it as much. The former Camden National building was the other one. So again, we looked at how do we repurpose those assets and make them more, make them valuable again to the town, to the community. And so the first thing I did is we looked at the comprehensive plan and says what is it that we can what is it that we want to achieve? What is it that the community wants to achieve in the Village Commercial District, and then what is standing in the way of being able to allow that to happen? And as Evan said, in the comp plan, it talks about specifically for downtown Orono's long-term transition from a neighborhood commercial district to a specialty district of restaurants, specialty goods stores, small offices, and financial services was identified. With the town strategy was to continue to invest in the infrastructure, business development, and marketing of downtown as a center of economic activity and a destination for goods, services, and entertainment. In addition, the second part of that, as he so eloquently put it, is that the town will also assure the ability for Orono downtown to grow in a compact, walkable manner, building on its village architecture and character. So the question became is what uses can those facilities be? What can they be used for that would still fit into into those definitions or that guidance? And the one thing that was I found a little strange is that drive-throughs as a general rule were permitted. It was an allowable use in the downtown, in the Village Commercial District. It was simply restaurants themselves that were prohibited. And so I needed to be able to look at that and say, okay, how does that fit? What does that work with? So, for example, a convenience store is allowed. So you could have a convenience store in the Village Commercial with a drive-through window because it's an allowable use. And the drive-through window by its nature is okay. So what's the difference of an impact of a convenience store with a drive-through window versus a restaurant with a drive-through window? Well, again, the issue is traffic. And so when Jana and I first started, tackling this to look to see how can we meet the goals of the comprehensive plan while making a review process that will clearly identify what uses would not have a negative impact on that in this district. And I say a negative impact, meaning how is it going to deal with traffic flow, that walkability, the other things that we hold precious to in any downtown that you're trying to maintain. And so we began by looking at language that could potentially allow the restaurant use to be the drive-through window with a restaurant, make it an allowable use, but put the emphasis on the standard rather than on the use. And what I'm trying to say is, look at what the impact is going to be on the traffic. What's it going to be an impact on the walkers? Look at that impact rather than the use itself, because I would argue that there are a lot of uses out there that could be potentially a negative towards towards those issues that isn't singled out by being a restaurant. And so then we looked at, well, what places in town would even in the Village Commercial District, what places would even make sense? Well, let's look at the ones that currently have drive-through windows and see what's the common denominator there. So we looked at the drive-through window, the businesses you know, at the UCU Credit Union, at the two other banks downtown. We also looked at what, you know, look at Wendy's and you know, Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts. What do they all have in common? And what we found is that all of those properties are on much larger lots than a lot of other non-drive-through businesses, which makes sense because you've got a lot of driving going on the property itself, off-street, within that property. It makes sense that it requires more property. And so we looked at, I say we, Jana did a lot of this research for me, we looked at what are other communities doing. Are they doing minimum lot sizes? Are there you know, other restrictions or other things that can better identify what a property might have more stress on it than another? And we came up with you know, the model of this 30,000 square feet. For example, Bangor has a minimum requirement of 20,000 square feet. We looked at what the ones that we are currently having that appear to be working, then what did they have in common? And that 2/3 of an acre, that 30,000 square feet seemed to be a really good rule of thumb. So we said, okay, in the Village Commercial District, how many lots are there that meet that criteria? And we identified by looking at them all, though there's probably 7 or 8 to 9 properties that meet that minimum lot size. Many of them were not, you know, feasibly, they probably would, you know, they're a big housing complex. The chances of it, of a drive-through restaurant buying out a large residential property is probably slim. And then a couple of them are in shoreline zoning. Again, makes it more difficult to, even though it's in a general development area, makes it a little more difficult. And then, so pretty much half of them, the ones that were, that would meet that criteria, already had drive-up windows. They are already currently being used for that. So we felt that our testing was meeting what we were trying to do, is that we could, if we limit it to the 30,000 square foot minimum lot size, then that means that you have the property that you need in order to be able to create proper traffic flow onto and off of the property. So that was number one. The next thing we said was, again, rather than trying to test whether these businesses are appropriate by the industry itself, let's look at it as how it's impacting the traffic in the area. And so that's why we came up with the requirement that this type of a use requires a traffic analysis to be done regardless of the area, because frankly, it shouldn't matter to us whether it's on Stillwater Avenue or whether it's in the Village Commercial. We still want to know what's the impact of this going to be on the area in front of the property, as well as what we call upstream and downstream, you know, of that property. And then the queuing analysis is very important as well, because you need to be able to know, you know, what we don't want is properties that with any type of a drive-through window, is that you've got traffic backed out into the main travel way that that's having a negative impact on the traveling public. So it's our belief that that type of analysis will tell you will tell you a better story as to what the impact is of that business is going to be on that area, as well as those areas upstreams, downstreams, rather than whatever industry it is. So if it was a convenience store with a drive-through, we look at what's the impact going to be. If the analysis shows that you're going to have traffic backed up, you know, halfway through town, in addition to a already congested time period downtown, well then, is that really an appropriate use for that space? I would argue, even as the economic development director, I would say that's probably not a good idea.
Is that realistic, though? I mean, I
Absolutely.
typically don't see at pharmacies or even the bank, the credit union, you don't see a long queue based on what I've seen versus the Dunkin' Donuts.
Correct.
At any location. So,
Absolutely. And I would say to you, for example, MDOT, Maine Department of Transportation, in their queuing analysis, they have a special study just for Dunkin' Donuts, because it's so far out of the norm that they couldn't use any standards that they have in their book. They
did a queuing analysis at the one on Stillwater when we approved that, and those cars still back out on Stillwater. So that model didn't work for that approval.
Okay.
So.
Well, as I said, I think that it's the quality of the study, I guess, is what's in question. It's got to be something that comes before the board, and that the board has confidence in. If you don't have confidence in it, then I probably shouldn't be supporting it.
So in the last, since you've been around, I'm just curious, I mean, so we've had 2 people come through, the bank has sold, that's a bank usage, so we've had 1 property in however many years that this may be an issue for. I'm trying to figure out why we have an ordinance revision, or why this is even necessary at this time.
Well, it's because as the director of community development, I was brought in to the town to say, how can we streamline processes, and how can we maintain the look and feel that the comprehensive plan identifies and supports? How can we develop the community and still keep that same feel? Mm-hmm. And so my position has been, you do that with your standards and your reviews, rather than simply say, we don't like green buildings, or we do like blue buildings. Let's just use a standard that you can actually look at and agree or disagree with, and that'll give you a more sensible feel of what the impact is going to be on the municipality, whether, again, it's in the village commercial or whether it's in C1 or C2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that.
Well, we'll open it up to questions in a bit.
And so, as I said, so we went to staff went to the council and said, here's what we think, that if you want to look at options, then we feel that the staff feels that a process can be put in place where the impact can be analyzed versus simply just banning it for the sake of banning anything.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Just one quick comment. Is there any mechanism or question, is there any mechanism now for that one property for us, if it's not an allowed use, could they actually, is there any way for them to, for instance, the building across the way, for them to get acceptance, other than an ordinance change for one parcel?
The only 2 ways it could happen is if the zone changed to a commercial 2 zone, but that would probably be illegal spot zoning. A spot zoning that would rise to, would fail under the spot zoning test. The other would be a contract zone, in which there would be a negotiation between the applicant and the town. The town council make a decision, but it'd come to you for review and recommendation. That would be the other mechanism. As you know, we've got several contract zones in Orono. My feeling about them from the past, that I don't think there should be a proliferation of them, so that we don't have 100 boutique zones all throughout the town, which kind of then dilutes the purpose of zoning and creating equitable opportunities and like uses and like things, in there. But that's not to say this couldn't be. This might be, it's meant for relatively unique situations, and if that were the property that needed something, it might be considered a unique situation, given that it's a facility with an existing drive-through facility And, you know, you and the council could look and staff could look very specifically at that in combination with the property owner, the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Question for Dave before we'll allow the public hearing questions in a bit, but.
So right now, there is no specific individual or property that's saying, I want to do this. It's just, you want to kind of have it as a bullet in your arsenal, so to speak, so that if someone wanted to, there was a property that needed to be used and someone wanted to use it for that purpose, it was a tool you could use.
Well, I don't want to, I'm not going to speak for any particular property owner, but I would just simply say is that I certainly have had conversations with, you know, several property owners who are redeveloping their properties. But the answer to your question for me is that we were looking at it before either one of those, when those two properties became on the market, I started looking at how, because I was actually out, you know, beating the bushes, trying to find buyers for it, so I was already looking at that.
And it would open up the possibilities. But right now, there's no active project that says, hey, I want to do this, you know, so it's driving this, so to speak. It's just more of a general, we think this would be a good idea.
Well, as I said, let me just say to you, as your economic development director, I'm bound by certain agreements that I have to make. If I was working with someone, I have agreements with them under non-disclosure agreements that I wouldn't be able to tell you even if there was.
Okay, all right. Yep.
So I'm only asking you to respect that part of it.
Totally, yeah.
And that, yep. I would say that we would be, regardless of whether something was or wasn't being considered, I'd be here anyway.
Understood, okay. I was just more of trying to get a sense if there was some urgency around it or not, so I'm good.
No, it's actually taken us quite a while to actually get here because, again, we did a lot of studying on it because, again, we feel the same. We want to make sure that if we're, if we're doing it, and as I would say to, responding back to what Evan said, is I did 2 contract zones the first year I was here, and he started giving me really dirty looks. That's not the way as a professional planner. We don't do things by contract zone constantly. So I have to look at, all right, I agree with him. It's just those were things that we needed to, I was trying to resolve those particular cases. I was resolving problems that I inherited, and that was a way to fix it. So my point is, we don't like to, as a community development, we don't like to develop by contract zone.
Very good. Other questions?
No, I have a question. On this little map, I take it that these numbers here refer to the amount of acreage?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. And so 30,000 square feet, you said was 2/3 of an acre?
That's correct.
So that the ones that are obviously bigger than that could accommodate this type of use if we...
Correct.
Okay.
Those numbers on here are the ones that we looked at that said, theoretically, these are the ones that could meet that criteria. In all fairness, if we felt that if we had 20 lots downtown that all met the criteria, maybe we need to go back and rethink it. But when we saw a relatively small number of lots that could conceivably be redeveloped, we thought that we were on the right path.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Other comments? I do have one, going back to the comp plan. So again, there wasn't anything specific that we talked about in those two and a half years. One thing that really jumped out at me, and Evan mentioned this, one of the 2 things that may apply as far as strategies is the walkability aspect of the downtown. And trying to encourage people to get downtown, get out of their vehicles, walk around. So I just don't, in my mind, I don't see a drive-through as encouraging more of a walkable community. And I'm just not sure, again, the bank, those examples, the pharmacy, they don't have big menu boards. So I see a drive-through restaurant for food purposes. I just see that, in my opinion, in a different light than a pharmacy. With just a window, and you're adding signage, you're adding lighting, whole other aspect. So I don't equate those, the same things. I see Dunkin' Donuts traffic, I look at other facilities around town, and you see the queues behind there. I'm just not sure that this, and again, my opinion, that this meshes with what we talked about for trying to develop a walkable community. But
Mr. Chair, can I respond to that?
yes, please do.
I think that Evan and I have had several really good positive conversations along those same lines. And I think that, my point, I think what you're missing is that I believe that the process will take care of that. And that if it's not rather than saying the industry, that's a pretty broad brush by saying that no matter what it is for a restaurant, it's always going to have large queuing. Well, that's not true. They're all different depending on what that particular use is. What I'm asking is take a different view of it and allow those numbers that tell you what those numbers that are being generated are. If those numbers are too high so that it's having a negative impact on the walkability, don't allow it. That's what should happen, and I would support that. So I'm just saying it's a different way of thinking of it. Don't think of it as the industry, but think of it as the impact, and let that process work. That's all I'm trying to say.
I don't see it as missing the point. We all have opinions. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Are we at opinion point, or?
I'm trying to figure out where this mess. Yeah. Yep. Well, very good. Thank you. I am going to open this up now, so please step up to the mic, state your name and your thoughts on the matter.
After listening to that, my name's John Tozer, and I own that building next door. So let me give you a little background on myself. I was born in Bangor in 1956. I was then raised in Orono for the remainder of my life, went to Orono schools, and my wife and I just a few years ago said, well, let's get ready to retire. And I said, wow, if one of those banks, I'd love to see this change to make Orono a better place. Something more visible, something that when the parents came to town, they said, oh, 1956, instead of, oh, they got a Starbucks. Not to say that that's what was going to be there, but let me just say that that is on the line, that there's a possibility that you can say, I have the walkability, I have a nice pad site, I have Starbucks that's in a community that looks nice, and it does have a drive up, and it does increase your traffic. So what I'm getting to is I've owned that for 2 years, bought it for its public knowledge for whatever hundreds of thousands it cost, and I paid $20,000 worth of taxes on it for the past 2 years so that I could sit here and look you in the face and say, I think this is good for Orono. That's my true purpose in life. My true purpose in life, if it were Laura and not an emotional buy, she would have said, let's retire, go to Florida, and let Orono fend for itself. But then I had a discussion with a large Canadian marijuana dealer about a month ago and said, if the state allows it, I'll buy that from you. I'm from Orono, and I can't even imagine coming down the street and seeing a green leaf on the side of that building and having it be marijuana sales. Boy, but you got a captive audience. You got the whole University of Maine sitting there. So I get here and I sit and I think, what is best for Orono? So I said, I don't want a Dunkin' Donuts. I don't want a McDonald's downtown, but a nice classy Starbucks. And if you, I would love to have you go online and take a look at some of the Starbucks buildings that have made all across the country that are in little malls, and they're in big places like the Bangor Mall, and they're in little kiosks. They're all over. They fit whatever bill you need. And I think Starbucks is willing to do something good for Orono. It's going to cost Laura and I, Laura's my wife, by the way, it's going to cost Laura and I a lot of money to do it. It would be a lot better for Laura and I just to walk away and sell it. So, as a citizen of Orono, having lived here for 62 years of my life, gone away to dental school, gone away to the University of Maine, Florida Institute of Technology, having done all that and coming back and say, what can we do that's good for Orono? I would love to see a pad out front with lights. I'd like to see palm trees out there too, but I know that's not going to happen. But at least something out there that says, yeah, Orono is walkable. And we have a Starbucks. And we have Pat's Pizza. If you want 50s, you can go to Pat's. Heaven knows, my cousin's husband owns it. You can go to Burt's and get some wine. You can go across the street in 3 different directions and get food and beer. Orono's become the beer capital of the state of Maine with 3 of, large beer manufacturers. So I guess what I'm saying as an individual who owns that is that you guys really have a choice. And I've held on it for 2 years, but I'm not going to hold on much longer. And when I went to Dave, I said, Dave, what is it that Orono really wants? I don't want that. I don't want a McDonald's. I don't want a car every 40 seconds lining up like Dunkin' Donut. So I said, what is it that Orono could use here and still pay for the building so that I can go away and retire maybe in another 10 years when Matthew's out of school. So Matthew's my 16-year-old. So I guess in a way I'm a little bit selfish. I'm selfish in the fact that I want what's best for this community, always have, always will. I want you guys to make a choice. You guys and ladies, I'm sorry. I don't mean to exclude you. I guess I think of you affectionately also. But I want you to think of what you want and what is best for Orono. And I think everyone's saying the same thing. Everyone's on the same page. So how do we get it done? You've already got 2 Dunkin' Donuts in Orono, one in Old Town. I think there's plenty of those around to cover Dunkin' Donuts. I do feel bad for the corner coffee shop down there, and I feel bad for Bert. I've known Bert all my life. But I don't think Bert's coffee business is what keeps her going. So I'm not sitting back going, yeah, I think, I'm going to destroy businesses here. I don't think I'm going to do that. But I would like to see, from an individual standpoint, the best use, the best payback for me would be a Starbucks restaurant in that spot. So.
Are there any Starbucks restaurants that are walk-up as opposed to, is a drive-through an essential feature for a Starbucks?
Yeah, there are. And I think you can probably see a lot of those going away too. All the ones in the mall went away. They had a small drive-through one over on Broadway that went away. So I think it's more of a, they have to have so many people buy $5 cups of coffee. My 16-year-old, can you bring me home a $5 cup of coffee? Frappuccino. It's like, yeah, I suppose I can. You're spoiled and I'm spoiling you. So I guess you can. And yeah, to answer your question, there are walk-ups, but I think if you want longevity in this community, you got to have something that says, we'll see 7 cars or 8 cars or 9 cars, whatever it is inside that parking lot. And then we'll try to figure out a way to get rid of all that traffic so it's not right up onto Main Street, close some of those entryways up, and make it nice for them. My thought.
Do people visit Starbucks sort of on a regular basis all day long, or are there times like in the morning when they get extra customers?
It is, I think I know where you're going with that question, and it will interfere with your traffic in the morning. And when students get out of school, all hours of the day, community, the University of Maine, you're going to have traffic with that. But I think they're pretty consistent. I did ask that question, but there are some heavy hours, and they have, believe it or not, the actual 4 to 11 slot is very, very busy for the Starbucks in Bangor. So I hope that answered that question.
I've got a question. Which lot is it that you own? I wasn't sure which.
That bank right across the way,
The bank building?
56.
Okay.
And I keep swallowing every time he says is it 3/4 of an acre, because I'm thinking, is it 3/4 of an acre? And then I'm thinking, And then the other thing that concerns me as an individual owner is that you're putting a restriction and I have to have traffic study. I'm not opposed to traffic study. I'm opposed to the $10,000 to $12,000 it costs to do a traffic study. So I look at that as a an emotional buy, and I keep looking at my wallet going, we could have been retired going to Florida. So, yes, that's a good question.
Other comments, questions? Thank you. Other comments?
Hi, I'm Lori Osher. I live on Mayo Street. I'm also a town councilor. And so I've only been a town councilor for a few months, so this came up to the town council, and the request was, could we have, send this to you guys to talk about whether we'd change so that if people wanted to do something like this, they would have the option. And the planners suggested that we'd have to have a traffic study. And so we thought, well, we don't want to, under this idea of economic development, we don't want to curtail economic development. But I can tell you, I just think it's ludicrous to have any more traffic on that intersection. And I used to use the Camden National Bank because to pay some people who work for me, I could direct deposit into their bank account, and I didn't really ever like doing that because of coming out onto Main Street. I didn't like using the drive-through, so I don't like pulling out of that parking lot. Even now when I park to come to these meetings, I just think it's very awkward. And I didn't know what it was that the owner of the property wanted to do that was generating this, so I'm glad I came to the meeting just to find that out as a citizen. And it's Starbucks is in urban areas where there's no parking at all, and they're mobbed all day long. So it's probably a really good retirement plan, even if there's no parking. And the Nest doesn't have any parking, and it's been busy all day long. And the Mill Street store actually seems to be having an uptick in business. I think Orno's doing really well, and I think whatever happens there could be good for Orno, good for the person who owns it. But as a citizen, I think less parking is better for a walkable town. I would rather see that be a building with no parking, and people would have to figure out that they could park in other places and walk a block or two and enjoy Orno. That's my personal as a town citizen. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I kept imagining in the last couple of months as this has been discussed, what would I want there? And I thought, what do we want Orno to be in the future? And I think Orno should be the kind of place that has businesses that are model businesses for the community. So I have this idea, which I already ran by Dave, and we haven't talked about it other than my email to him. I have this idea that we could have a business that has disabled adults working at it. Like there's bakeries in the east, various cities in the East Coast. There's even one in Maine, southern Maine, I think Biddeford maybe, where you get federal grants and you partner with the owners to do a business that is basically the extension of what we have with the Orno Unified Teams, where our kids who stay in school till they're 21 because they're not quite on the same track as those who go right to college, and kids who may never go to college when they become adults don't have many opportunities for working. But if we had a business where people came to go to a bakery and the bakery was run partially by people who are disabled adults, I think that's
we
the
do
kind of
need to
town.
bring this back to drive-throughs, though.
So anyway, that's what I would say. There's my pitch. There's my statement as a citizen is I think we need less parking spaces in the downtown, and I think we don't need a drive-through. So there's mine.
Thank you. Other comments? I'm going to leave the public hearing open, and again, bring it back to the board for comments, what we've heard tonight, what you think of the comp plan. Questions for Evan or Dave?
So I'm just wondering about the traffic. I obviously, like everyone, deal with traffic on the way to work and on the way home and throughout the day in downtown Orono, and very familiar and aware of it. But it seems to me that if you have a drive-through business here, it wouldn't really add to the traffic. It may change the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I may drive by and swing into Starbucks, pick up a cup of coffee and keep going. But I don't, in my opinion, I don't see anybody coming to Orono who isn't already coming to Orono to go to Starbucks. So I don't think it would really add to the traffic. What I think it might do is change the dynamic, maybe negatively, maybe not, I don't know. It would have to be looked at with a traffic study, but I just don't see it adding traffic, just from my perspective.
I think that the one possible add is that you'd have all these apartment buildings, those students coming up. Right now, they don't. They're gonna now potentially come up, go through Main downtown, go get their Starbucks, and then go back through. So I think the net, well, I don't know. But that would be, I could see that happening.
Potentially.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern is what Phil said, is like these models they have for queuing now are not accurate. I don't even know, every fast food restaurant I go by, it's out in the road. I don't even understand, I'm like, where are all these people? Why are they all eating this food? I won't comment on that, but essentially, I'm like, every one of them, McDonald's, Wendy's, Dunkin' Donuts, they're all like backed out into the road, 5, 6, 8 cars deep. Who even waits that long? Like, I'm like, I see 3 cars, I wouldn't even wait for that, but people are waiting, 20 cars deep. And so I just look at that here, I'm like, how is that possibly gonna work? Like the Starbucks over by the mall. You go in there to Toys R Us and it's backed out, almost into the road. So all around the building, then back out almost into the road. So my biggest concern would be how accurate those queuing models were, which is what you discussed, is if they are not, I don't know if they've caught up with what's going on now or not, but it just seems like, because if we say yes to this, we're not saying yes to this one nice project, which sounds like it would be nice. We're saying yes to McDonald's, Wendy's,
Correct.
anything that comes in here is what we're saying yes to.
And again, I listened to Evan's discussion about contract zones, and I agree with that philosophy. But my fear is whether we would open up a can of worms to something that might not jibe with the comp plan. That was my question to him, as to whether there was another option for a business that might go there, that, for a limited number without redoing an ordinance. And I understand that the planning department, economic development, has looked at this. I just wasn't sure that it was necessary, because we've got one business that has an interest. So just my thoughts. But
I have 2 comments. One is, I think that Dave does raise an interesting point about coming up with a process to make these kinds of decisions, because, we hear about Starbucks, and some of us might like Starbucks, and some of us might prefer Dunkin' Donuts, and some of us maybe hate both of them. So I think one issue is to think about, can we come up with some sort of process so that we can have a discussion about something like this, where we have rules that everybody can live with about, how we make a decision. And then getting back to this particular question, I mean, I just want to raise the thought about the health of the community, because none of these things are really good for you, and it's not good to go into your car and drive up and get something to eat and continue to drive and eat in your car. I mean, that's just not, it's not healthy. And, obesity is a huge issue in this country, and we're all going to pay the price for it as our insurance costs go up to pay for all the people that have diabetes and obesity-related illnesses. So I just want to put that little plug in there about community health, because I think it's something to think about.
thank you. Others? What do you think down there? Anybody?
I think that we really got to pay attention to the traffic, because I live out near the Dunkin' Donuts, and I pretty near got nailed on going down Stillwater Avenue more than once, and somebody pulling out of there turning left. And I remember when we issued the permit, we wanted it to be no left-hand turn, but they didn't want it that, and in our infinite wisdom, we said, okay, you can turn left, and they do. I've been on this board for quite a long time, and a lot of the big projects that we've approved have definitely made an impact on traffic. There's no question about it. So I think that, when we had traffic studies, and we had experts here telling us, well, there's no problem, this fits all the different models that we have. Well, I don't think they maybe chose the right model. I think if we approve this, and I'm not opposed to not approving it, we really need to be some strict language on traffic studies, period. And also does it fit with the business, fit within the facade of the community down here.
Thanks, Dave.
I agree, we need to keep an open mind, and we need to think, well, is this a good project, or are this going to open up good projects? We want to make sure that it doesn't open up the door, as Phil said, for whatever wants to come in there.
Thank you, Dave. John, what do you think?
I think this is a tough corner.
Yeah.
Speaking of this one specifically, it's a tough corner for traffic.
Mhm. Mike?
I'm not a voting member tonight, but I agree, it's a
You,
very
you
tough.
get to participate.
It is, I'm not gonna be against your business model, but I remember when Camden National Bank was there, and you just feel like you need to let somebody out when the light is green, and you upset the people behind you. And you did mention that you would close off one of the entrances, so would you be dumping one of your?
We've got some preliminary plans.
Can we, sorry, can we get you up there? Thanks.
To answer your question, there's some preliminary planning that actually puts the traffic going down whatever the street is. Pine Street?
So then they would be turning left on Pine Street to get back up to Main Street.
Supposedly a right turn only onto Pine Street. As you know, there are going to be people that break that law.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an exception to everything that we would propose to do. And, but I think working with planning people and making this so that we can close off all but one of those street entrance, make this an entryway, double wide it in, and then have everyone go out Pine Street. And then when David was saying, you know, then we have to look downstream, what does that do? So all these questions, when they say they want to do studies, traffic studies, I think those will answer part of it. Will they be perfect? I don't think so. Are we perfect as citizens? No, not necessarily, but we try. So we try to do the best you can do to make this thing work. And as far as Ms. Osha, I have a special needs child. She's 29 years old. And I'd love to see something like that occur. But it's only 2,400 square feet. So you really need a bigger facility, I'm afraid. But I would love to see that. You know, I would, truthfully. But also there's, if you can get the grants to stay and keep coming, that's another thing too. All those things have been looked at. And from an economic model, from an economic model and a city model, I think Dave Mylan and your crew is a great crew. They're trying to protect Orono the best they can, and I'm holding on as long as I can to make sure it's done properly. So I know it's not going to always answer your questions, but as far as traffic coming back, they do have to cross traffic. So if they come back from here, they have to cross traffic to get in there. So if it's really busy in the morning, I think a college student go to Roma Joe's, truthfully. And I think if they're trying to get in, coming into college, then they still got to go back down and either come back up by the church, or they got to go back down by the Oak Street. Thank you. So, you know, it does pose a lot of problems. And I even did think about saying, you know, to Starbucks, why don't you just have a walk up? Because they really do. They want a pad site out there. They want to make it look nice. They want to have lawn, and they like to have it look pleasant for people. That's what they sell. They sell sex appeal. They're not selling, well, and they also sell, like Lisa said, sugar and unhealthiness. So I think we have to look at all those things too. You know, I tell my son when I see these things, how many of those a week do you really want to put in your body? And yeah, it's a lot of sugar. But that is a human choice, and that's one that we make. I love McDonald's French fries. I give up. But I don't go there but once a month for a McDonald's French fry and get the small. And then I go to the gym and I feel guilty for the next month. So there are those things, but humans should have the right to make that choice. We are, after all, individuals. And hopefully health insurance is going to be absolutely free for us at some point.
All right. Well, thanks. So back to drive-throughs. So, you know, we have proposed ordinance language. We've heard from, you know, a few of the residents that have come in. I need to know more questions, and then how we're going to proceed tonight. So, I mean, yes, there are some strict standards, and I'm an engineer. I mean, you have to base assumptions. There's a, you know, traffic manual. That's how you have to go about that. You know, the fact is that some of them have missed the boat. So I have concerns there. My bigger concern is whether that's what we want for downtown Orno. So, the drive-through restaurants. So I'm wrestling with that.
Yeah, well, I think part of what makes downtown Orono special is that it is a walkable area. So much of our whole environment is arranged for the convenience of cars. And so here's something that's arranged, okay, cars still have a lot to say about it, but at least it is walkable. And so I hate to see us do something that's going to reduce the walkability. And if this is being done, if the chief driving force here is this one project, then maybe the way, even though we don't like contract zones.
We like contract zones for unique situations that are very different than other situations in the same area.
But
So
if we're going to say we really want downtown Orono to be walkable, that's like a very high priority, then this could be a unique situation. If we make an ordinance, then we're opening the door to more of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So another thing that came up at the town council level was that if this is decided on the size of the property, right? So that Dave said, oh, there's only so many properties that this would even apply to, because all the properties in downtown Orno are smaller, except for these few. But that doesn't preclude people from buying two properties, making them the same property.
Mr. Chair, actually, this ordinance does,
Yes.
Because I think Jana must have heard that comment.
Oh, okay.
Jan and Dave incorporated that it has to be this size as of the date of the effective
Oh, great.
date of this
Yay.
ordinance, so that you
Thank
could not consolidate.
Very good. Thank you. Other
Mr.
comments or,
Mr.
yeah.
Chair, if I could just add a few things, and as I say, I'm not going to enter into this fray very much. On the traffic modeling, there is absolutely nothing that would prohibit the planning board or staff, in fact, I can't imagine we wouldn't, from actually looking at requiring an applicant to look at the actual experience and modify the models based on the actual experience in the Orono, Old Town, Bangor area. So we want to actually survey data from those places and calibrate the model accordingly. That certainly has been done in the past. That's something that could be done here. Secondly, walkability. One of the things that you might weigh, whether it's in a contract zone or a general zone proposal such as this or something else, Orono is walkable. It's one of the more walkable communities, and our downtown is walkable. But that stretch, and we thought about a lot about this over time. That stretch from, well, at least Pine Street to Mill Street, both sides, because of the loss of the parking some 30 years ago on Main Street, because of a couple of the land uses, such as one next door here, and so forth. It does not see a lot of pedestrian activity except for those who are moving from somewhere south of downtown, the neighborhoods downtown, and walking toward the bridge. You don't see a lot of, the businesses retail businesses have not survived there, and very well. I guess we have a hair salon that's been there now a while, but they're now mostly, and the Nest is right at the corner. But unless you have a auto-oriented business like the next door at the convenience store, you just don't have much walking. So one thing you look at and ask the question is, would this build some critical mass for more walking out, more things to potentially walk to, as at the same time as you're looking at, does it create dangers or a hostile environment, or are there ways to mitigate that? So you just weigh those things. I don't think anybody, and I've been here a lot less time than many of you, but for 12 years I've looked at that, and and really thought about that. We did a facade improvement program. We tried to figure out what other uses might go there to increase the pedestrian-related activity in that stretch. But nothing, very little can survive there facing Main Street. To the extent, you know, some of them are, like Baraboo Pub has turned its back on Main Street, and its frontage was really the parking lot. Because that is not, I can be out there for 3 hours in the middle of the day on a nice, beautiful day and see 4 or 5 people walking that stretch because there's nothing to go to. For walk that you go in, if you've got business at the insurance company or at the financial advisor, yeah. But more you see cars pulling into Circle K or people parking out back and walking into the back of the stores, the restaurants there. So one thing that's very important, and whether this adds to it or detracts from it or whatever, but just weigh, can you build critical mass of activity that people actually want to walk to? And that'd be another consideration, not just at this location, but in general. And you know, this is not a site plan for Mr. Tozer's or Dr. Tozer's project yet, but you know, it's been brought up as an example, so it's perfectly legitimate to be talking the way you are. But
I just remember there was an awful lot of discussion during the comp plan development process about walkability, and then where do you start? So listening to that description, whether it's, you know, whether it's a lost cause right now, but you know, where do you start to try to improve walkability, and again, maybe obtain that critical mass. So
yeah, creating things that people want to walk to is the first thing you need to do. And you know, when we talked about trying to get the University of Maine to locate something down here, that's what we were after.
Right.
And other things, but you know, in the end, a lot of things that rely on pedestrian traffic, given its kind of lonesome nature, and to some extent hostile environment, but you have to walk by, and you know, with big wide curb cuts and cars trying to get out onto Main Street, discourages it. And then once you pass that point, Mill Street, terrific.
So,
and so forth.
but I think we're focusing way too much now on this one property.
Just one property.
Exactly,
So-
and
so
this is not about that one property.
Correct.
Right.
This
yes,
is
sir.
about allowing it in 8 locations downtown.
Right.
And I personally, just to cut it kind of short here, am not prepared to say yes to this, just because I think it's a big deal, and I think it could totally change the shape and how the downtown is. And I don't want to make it just like, okay, that is okay. And then in 3 years, we've got, you know, 2 of these things down there in downtown, and we're like, oh my gosh, what happened? I just feel like I'm not prepared tonight, at least, to say, yeah, let's go with this. But that's
Okay,
my personal-
so you're not prepared to say yes. Does that mean, so one of the options was to continue this discussion? Do we need more information based on what we've heard tonight? So that's part of what we need to think about. I haven't heard the need to justify an ordinance, in my opinion, again, what you said. I don't know that there's a huge need for this other than one property, and it seems like that there might be an option. But if we're going to make a decision tonight, I need to hear from others, or if we need
I'm not ready to
more-
make a decision. I want to be able to study the proposed language in the ordinance
Okay,
to a greater extent than I already have.
okay.
There's no question. in my
Would
mind.
everybody, I mean, a public hearing is not closed. I could leave the public hearing open, and we can chew on this for a little while. You know, come back next month, and if economic development, if you have any new information that's going to help us make a decision, anything that you can develop in the next month, I don't know what that would be, but you know, this is something that I'm not particularly ready to make a decision either. I'd like to digest for a little bit. Thoughts on that, Lisa?
I'm fine with that plan.
Okay, Krista?
Yeah, I'm fine with,
Okay, Judd, you already said you're not ready. Dave, not ready. Jeremy?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Already.
Okay, very good. I think what we're going to do is table this. Is there any information, again, that you can think of that we have not received, that town staff could prepare for us that might help our deliberations?
Well, I have to say that I'm intrigued by the process idea that Dave has proposed, but
Yeah.
not being not knowing anything about economic
Yeah.
development and the rest of it. Maybe if he could explain that, add some things to it, come in with a flow sheet, a visual, I don't
Yeah.
know, something like that might be helpful. Just because I'm intrigued that if we had a way to think about issues like this, it might help
Mhm.
us. So, I
Good
don't know.
suggestion. Yeah. I think over time, since I'm on this board, and not as long as Dave, but been here a while, and the whole process has improved greatly. The review and how planning department has made our job, and, well, Krista too, you've been here longer than me.
Oh, yes.
It's
We've
become a
gone from the
lot
wild,
easier,
wild
but,
west.
yeah, but it's gotten just so much better since I first started. So any opportunity to improve a process so this board can make decisions, I guess, a little bit more educated, I think that's a great idea.
Because he does talk about, we're not, try not to think about the content, which I think we do have to consider because we're looking at the character of the town.
Right.
But on the other hand, I see where you were going with this, and if I had a little more, it might be helpful.
Very good. So I'm gonna, well, I need a motion, I guess, to table this. So,
Make a motion, we table it until next time.
very good.
Second.
Very good. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? Good. So next month, we'll continue the discussion, I assume. Next up, other new business. I don't know of any. Could you give us a heads up? Yeah, what's
Yeah,
going down the
first
pipe?
of all, I wanted to follow up on another item that you had on your last agenda, and that is the extension of time for the Edge at Orchard Trails site plan, subdivision site plan. We did talk with town attorney, and after some very constructive back and forth about the language of our ordinance, they concluded and put in writing to us, and the code enforcement officer has informed the applicant that under current language, a strict reading of our current language, the 3-year clock started again with the new approval.
Okay.
Because the language of that section on extension of time really has 2 sentences. One sentence says, any site plan approved by the planning board, shall expire unless a permit is pulled within 3 years. Second sentence talks about the criteria for extending that 3-year deadline. The fact that the first sentence starts with any site plan, any, to the attorney said, meant that if there was a change to a plan that was so significant that it had to come back to the planning board, that would count, again, the clock would start over. Dave and I have talked, and we think we ought to propose an amendment to that because, small amendments shouldn't be, because the standards change, and as standards have changed in this case, that the planning board should have some authority to say, even though there's been a small amendment here, the clock doesn't start over again. You need to justify the need for an extension. But in any case, right now, they now have until 2021 to pull a permit. And so it's a moot matter for the board.
Well, thanks for the update.
Now, as to May,
The 16th, you're available. It's June that you were gonna miss.
right,
What do we have coming down the pike?
This.
at this point, we don't, there have been some things that have been discussed, but we don't have applications.
Right.
So,
Very good. Next up is our item on discussion, and I did have an item for discussion. So typically, I think you've been a little bit more lenient with this board, and I'm sure it depends on the topic, but having a one-item agenda for ordinances, again, if we could double up, if there's any way. I mean, this is a volunteer board. People are busy. So when I first saw this, I was wondering whether this was critical to have a meeting to discuss one ordinance revision. Good discussion. Here we are sitting, at 8:20, and we're still here. So it seems like it could, I guess, justify the time we spent this evening. But typically, if there's a little more flexibility, so that we don't have to come in for an ordinance discussion, if it can be paired with other projects, I think that's preferred. So
you
just in my
just need to scare up some other projects.
yeah.
maybe there'd be a Starbucks site.
Well, I'm just thinking of, ordinance revisions, there's other things, so
Yes.
rather than having
So
one
the
item
question
agendas.
is,
Yep.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep,
is if the only item on the agenda in May would be continued discussion on this to make a there is a thing that the council's asked for a recommendation.
I
And
get that,
so it's, they would like that to be relatively timely, so, but you tell us whether it's your board and you can decide whether to, unless something comes in the next week.
so that's at the start of this, we're already tabling this, so I am gonna ask the board, so I
Yes.
thought of that if it's
Yes.
now one item on the agenda. So typically, I don't know that we need to meet every time for ordinance revisions. Usually we tack these on with, if there's some other project that we're gonna review, so that has been typical over time, so, but here we are, we've chosen to table this. What are your thoughts for a May meeting, or would people want to push it back till June with, I guess, the hope that maybe there's something else? So, thoughts on that? Start down that way.
What would be the date of the June meeting?
Well, normally it would be, it is the third Wednesday, which is June 20th. I, in fact, will not be in town. I didn't know I would be fulfilling this role, and I've got other plans that week. But Dave could handle it, could step into this position, or maybe the town will have a planner on board by then. Or you could move it to the week before, June 6th. If you skip May, you could move it to Wednesday, June 6th, when I will be around. Something like that, so.
Which if we don't have May, that would be fine too, because we can still meet our advertising deadlines that way. If we move it ahead a week.
Say that last thing again that you just said?
If we move the June meeting ahead a week and skip the May meeting, we can still meet our advertising deadlines. So we could do it that way.
All right, do we want to meet in May? That's the question.
Yeah, I was looking at it because I'm going to be away in June, but of course I can't remember which week now, so this is. I can meet in May or June or both.
Krista? Want a month off, or do you want to meet in May?
I can do either one.
Okay.
Same.
I don't like meeting any more than necessary, but I do think where we have been asked by the council to review this, and we have basically agreed to review with just one item tonight, and we've agreed to table it, it kind of puts us in a little bit of a commitment to actually get back to them in a timely manner. So I can meet both times, and I'm okay going either way, but I think it's on us basically to review it sooner than later.
Very good. Dave?
Yeah, I can meet the normal Wednesday, I can't meet the second.
Okay, so May is okay. John?
May is okay.
May is okay with me. I
Okay.
agree with Jeremy's comments.
Yeah. Mike?
I agree with Jerry. I think we just said we wanted to table it.
No,
We just do it down the road to the next meeting.
Very good. All right, we're meeting in May.
Nice point, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. All right, last up, adjournment and signing of Mylars. Have a motion.
Yes.
I move we adjourn.
Second?
Yep,
Seconded.
Further discussion? Hearing none?
Yeah.
We're adjourned?
I'm gonna wait to see what that was. Yes, I have the badge.